Good morning, comrade. You listen to WHIVLP New Orleans 102.3. This is your weekly Good Morning Comrade. Jeff here on the show. We have a very special guest this week, Felix, returning champion. You may remember him from his visit several months ago, actually, where he came and talked about some of the on-the-ground essentially anti-genocide protests in Gaza. He's also been a very busy person in the sense that he also was attempting to organize a union at Lowe's and then got fired. And we're going to be talking about that today. Felix, tell the people hello.
Hello, everybody. I'm Felix.
Yeah, go ahead and introduce yourself to the folks.
Good morning, comrades. I'm Felix. I'm from North Carolina, but I've lived here in New Orleans for almost 5 years now. Moved down here during the beginning of the pandemic, because I'm a musician and I studied music in school and was going to come here and play, but decided to come here during the pandemic while all the music venues here in New Orleans were shut down, so I could get a part-time job and get set up with that. And I ended up landing at Lowe's and ended up working there for about 2.5 years, as we'll discuss. And I think, as many people do when they work that type of job, recognize a lot of problems and frustrations there, which led us to organize there.
Yeah. So let's first off, I didn't know you were from North Carolina. My brother actually lives down there.
Okay.
Cool. I just saw him a couple weeks ago in Raleigh. But yeah,
that's where I grew up.
Oh, no way. Yeah, I love it down there. It's a really cool town. I don't want to get into the politics of like which barbecue is better because that's really messy. But like I as a guy am a fan of all barbecue. ABAB, all barbecue is beautiful, right?
Yeah, don't say all barbecue matters.
Yeah. but yeah. So the vinegar is interesting. I will say that. But yeah, so I guess just sort of lay it out. I mean, we've all been to Lowe's. You know, one of it's one of those places that's also incredible because it's got veteran reserved parking, which I always thought was very funny. I went to a Lowe's one time on, I think it was either Memorial Day or Veterans Day, and they had like one of the parking spots like
they make a fucking shrine.
Yeah, they had like chairs and like this is a cool place for a veteran to hang out or something. I'm like, why would anybody want this?
I think it's like a shrine or something. They basically make a shrine to veterans on Memorial Day and Veterans Day, because just Lowe's wants to show just how patriotic it is.
Oh my God!
Because they just care that much about our freedoms.
Yeah, that they'll make the parking spot that's reserved for the veterans into a spot that they can't park in anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
They put like a lawn chair and some like flag strings or whatever on there.
That's what they do.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, let's get into it. Working at Lowe's, what was it like, and what kind of like pushed forward to this this union drive that you attempted a few years ago?
Yeah, so well, like I said, I applied there, not really expecting to get that job. I thought you actually had to know stuff about hardware to work at Lowe's.
Oh, you sweet summer child!
This is not the case.
Buddy, I worked. So when I gotta like do a side thing, but when I was in college. I just like went. You probably don't even remember this because you're a young guy, but I worked at a Sears in the hardware department for a couple of years. I had zero experience, zero anything. It's just like, oh, okay, get in there and go sell lawnmowers and tractors and stuff.
Yeah, and that on the job application, I was like trying to play up every previous experience I had. Yeah. Like I went on a service project to like work on roofs and shit for like a week. So that's my resume. I did some landscaping, but yeah, I ended up getting the job. I went in there for the job interview, and they ended up asking me, "Hey, do you want to work on this overnight project?" So basically, we're moving everything in the store around. So the light bulb aisle went from aisle 1 to aisle 8, and they're reorganizing. Yeah, it was a mess, but they're reorganizing the store during something called P51 or Project 51. And so I was supposed to work there overnight and do all that. It was a bunch of drilling and moving steel beams and stuff. Not like too crazy carpentry or anything, but I did end up making a bunch of wooden pegboards that you hang like those little JPEGs on that all the little trinkets hang on. I ended up climbing on a lot of stuff and under a lot of things, which eventually 2 years later, I actually got written up for doing those things, despite the fact that managers asked me to do it when during this.
Oh, I love when that happens. I love when like they tell you to do something and then you did wrong. That's awesome. Like
Exactly.
I've never worked at a place that didn't do that. Quite frankly,
Yeah.
it's one of the most like universal experiences as a worker, at
Yeah.
least
So this
in
was,
retail.
yeah, exactly. So this was like it ended up being a few months project. Like I said, I was, sitting with my legs dangling very high up off the ground often, and the managers would just say, "Cool, be careful," because I had to drill
Don't
things,
get
and I
hurt.
was,
Don't get hurt, so we don't have to have an insurance claim or something.
yeah,
Like,
exactly. And one of the managers from what's called the merchandising service team saw me doing all that stuff, and she was like, "Damn, I want to hire this dude because he does all this shit." Because I'm not allowed to curse probably, but because he wants to do all that stuff. So we really need to hire him so he'll get dirty and help us build all of these displays. So um, I ended up applying for that job eventually. The project we were working on was supposed to be like 2 months long, but we were really behind because every Lowe's store in the country was doing it, and they send you all these diagrams of what you're supposed to do, and sometimes they don't really work out to each store the same way.
yeah, because the footprint's always different, right?
Yeah, yeah, and like sometimes you got like a fire alarm in the way or something, so you got to figure out how to maneuver around that. But this project was extremely frustrating to work on for a lot of reasons. Uh, you know, we got basically coerced to working 6 days a week sometimes and working like 10-hour shifts without taking a lunch break. And I mean, we could have, but I was trying to get hired on like full time to the
Yeah,
position I wanted, so I felt pressure to do it. Um,
classic.
that made me hate the job already. Understaffing was a huge thing. So we were supposed to work on. We weren't really supposed to have any customer service function. And originally, I was supposed to be working overnight, but they shifted me to like a 5 a.m. to 2 p.m. shift. So we would be working on all these, like, we'd be moving steel beams around. We'd be moving tons of merchandise around and making a huge mess. And then while you're like, I don't know, laying backwards on the ground like a mechanic trying to drill something in. Someone comes up to you, says, "Say, man, where the toilets at?" Say, man, or they'll like come up to you with this little like 800-year-old screw and ask you to find an exact replica of it while
Uh,
you're clearly in the middle of something. And I don't blame them for that. That just happens because they legitimately need help, but there's just not enough people in the store. I mean, and if you're a customer in a hardware store, you should be able to get some help. But we were just so understaffed that we ended up having to take up a function that we weren't supposed to do. I ended up having to cut a lot of wood for people, which I definitely wasn't supposed to be doing, or like even making keys for people. So that got really frustrating really quickly because you have this pressure to finish the
oh,
job,
hold
but
on.
then
Yeah, hold on a second. You're saying that essentially you're there to do a construction job. Essentially, you're there
yes,
to build like these displays and like these aisles and all this other stuff. And they don't even have, I mean, I've had the experience myself of, trying to go through a Lowe's or a Home Depot and trying to find somebody wearing the apron. Nowhere to
yeah,
be found because they don't hire anybody. But like they would come up to you who's like doing like heavy labor with machine
yeah, and I'm like not
and
even,
like, "Hey
I'm
bro,
not
can you
even,
make me a key?"
yeah, exactly. I'm not even. I don't think I knew how to make a key yet at that point. But that was, as I found, that was a long running thread during my entire tenure at Lowe's. But I wasn't even wearing the like Lowe's clothes. They could just tell I worked there. But it's
Yeah.
like when
This
I
guy's
first
doing
went,
stuff. He must be
yeah,
able to make me a key or saw me some wood. And I
exactly,
imagine you probably needed like some kind of maybe not the key thing. I mean, I imagine there was some level of training for that, but like
yeah.
especially like cutting wood, like using like saws and stuff like that, that would require some kind of certification or training, or you would think that would be like very basic safety protocol, right?
We didn't get a lot of training. We didn't hurt ourselves, but and we figured it out on the job. Let's just put it
Classic.
that way. But yeah, I think it was funny because when I first went to the Lowe's store I worked at, it was as a customer. I was
Mhm.
going to get a doorknob or something, and I wanted to like make sure they were universal or make sure it would actually fit my door. And I was looking around for someone, and I just went up to the first red vest person I saw, and I felt like, dang, they were kind of rude. But then actually having worked there, then I understood, oh, wait, they weren't being rude. That's literally not their job to tell me about that doorknob. That's
Right.
not their area of expertise. It's not their department. They're probably from plumbing or something.
Yeah. They don't
So
know.
they don't know. Yeah. So that kind of awoken me. But I think understaffing was a big thing. Pay eventually became a bigger issue. I wasn't as worried about it at the time because I just was happy to have a job, and I started at $12 an hour, which at the time I thought was
Woo.
fine. Now
What
that
year is this? What
seems
year is this?
this
$12.
was so I probably my first
2020.
day on the floor was like December 1st, 2020.
Ay
Um,
ay ay. $12 an hour. Mamma mia.
yeah, so I felt lucky to have a job at that point, so I
Yeah.
wasn't concerned about that yet. But
Mhm.
that was kind of how I started there. Um, And then I eventually got hired on as a member of the merchandising service team, which essentially does the same thing as what the project we were working on was. So
Mhm.
basically, like all these vendors like Craftsman or DeWalt or I don't know, all the toilet companies. I can't even remember their names now because it's been so long.
Kohler, American Standard, some of them.
Exactly, American Standard. They all they fund this program called MST, which basically um, is people like me who would go around and build displays and shift all their inventory around. I remember our manager came and our district manager came and thanked us, saying like, "Yeah, we're so thankful for you guys. Like everything, every reset you do, they're called resets, is when you build all the displays. Every reset y'all do leads to a 3 to 5% bump in profits, which is solely
Oh,
because we
are they
just moved.
flexing on you?
We're flooding, yeah. So like us moving the toilets around in a slightly different arrangement is supposed to make a customer say, "Oh, that's new. Like, let me buy
Yeah,
that toilet." That kind of thing.
I'd like to poop
Um,
on that one.
yeah, that one exactly. Um, but so I got hired on as that, and kept noticing the same problems. Understaffing was annoying. We're wearing these navy blue shirts instead of the red vests, but we still end up having to take on a lot of customer service function. Sometimes I would have to get on the forklifts and go in the back of the warehouse and like find a washing machine that someone had ordered because the people from appliances weren't scheduled in a way that they could take a break and still have someone back there. So that got really frustrating. Other people had a lot of problems too. Uh, you know, there are people who had issues with their health care, people who had issues because they wanted to take a water break and they worked outside and they were getting, um, give, I don't know, they're getting problems from management because they took too long a water break in the New
In
Orleans heat.
South Louisiana. Yeah.
Yeah. So like I said, I'm from North Carolina and it can get hot there, but it's different down here. It's
Yeah,
humid
it
out
just
here.
hits way different. When I come home, so I live in Virginia now, obviously.
Yeah.
So like when I come home and like as soon as I step like out of the airport onto the like little pickup area, it just hits you like a punch in the mouth. Like it's just like so hot, so humid, especially in, that May through,
Yeah.
October, November period, like half the year.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, it reminds me of this. I won't get into it. It reminds me of this one Vin Diesel movie where they're on this planet where it gets really, um, but uh, um, but yeah. So things like that. There was a lady who was told, a cashier, she was probably close to 70 or maybe older than 70, who, um, they wouldn't let her sit down when she was working as a cashier, or they would give her give her the business for wanting to sit on a stool some of the time. So things like that added up, and people just had various problems like that. So it probably wasn't until like I think it was April of 2022. Yeah, so I'd worked there about a year and a half by that point, where I seriously thought about kind of organizing, because it's there are no unionized lows, and
Mhm.
it's a complicated process to go through. So it took a lot of kind of I think that's it had been something that had always been in the back of my mind, but it definitely took something else for that to click. And I met a lot of people here in New Orleans. Like, there are a lot of activist minded folks, and I met a group of people who were flying outside of McDonald's to try to. I don't know. I don't think there was a clear goal at that point, but basically to try to agitate the McDonald's workers. But that was
Was it
kind of
like
my
around the Fight for 15 era? I guess it was a little bit
it
after.
was kind of like that. It was a
Mhm.
group called the Louisiana Workers Councils at the time.
Mhm.
One of whom I think was a lady who actually ran for president at one point. But For Workers World Party,
Okay.
very knowledgeable person. But that was my first time doing that, and I think having the experience of going up to workers and talking to them about, like, hey, what's your issues with your workplace, how much money are you making, made me realize, like, all right, it might be hard to do this at my workplace because they're non-unionized, but I at least feel like I can do this now, and it might be worth a shot. And I think one of the other things that kind of made it click, in addition to having to stay late sometimes, understaffing, seeing what was going on with my coworkers, and I don't know, even things like people not getting to take time off when they wanted to, or getting fired because they were late. Like, how it is here. Like,
Mhm.
the bridge goes up, and if you live in the ninth ward, you're screwed.
Yeah.
Like,
Right
you're going to be
now,
late.
like as a recording, you don't even have Claiborne Bridge right now. It's just the
Right,
St. Claude
exactly. It's
Bridge,
just St. Claude Bridge. So
or you could
there's
just drive all the way out to the Florida Avenue Bridge if you're a real sicko.
exactly. So uh, that's a things like that are a big issue. But one thing that really happened, I don't know if you remember that Michael Jordan documentary that came out, where I think there is something that gets memed a lot, where he says, "And I took that personally."
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, I think one of my moments like that was, so I was probably making 1267 at some point, and a lot of the people who were getting hired newly, who I was actually training, were starting at 15. And
When you're making
I think
12.
they should start at 15. That's great, but
Mhm.
it kind of hammered home the point that they're just going to pay us based on all these metrics or whatever. They don't care about who we are as people. Um, and
Well, they
I
don't care
kind
about
of
seniority. They don't care about somebody who's been there a while. I mean, it's nothing
right,
against the people that just show up, but you've
right,
been there a while. You're literally training somebody to make more money than you. It
yeah,
doesn't. I mean, it logically doesn't make sense. No disrespect to the people that are coming in; they deserve to
yeah,
make a living wage as well. But like, you're literally doing extra work for somebody who's going to be making more money than you. It doesn't make a whole lot. I mean, I've seen even situations where you have like normal employees training managers and stuff like that. It's like, what is happening? You know what I mean?
exactly. And they asked at one point they asked one of my coworkers who had been there like years and years, and she had applied to be a manager, but they gave it to someone from uh, who hadn't ever worked at a Lowe's, and they asked my friend to train the new manager who had just gotten the job that the person training her wanted. But
Mhm,
so I ended up kind of jokingly asking my supervisor, and my supervisor was a super cool dude, asking
mhm,
him for a raise. And he didn't have the power to give me a raise, but he
sure.
can put in the computer and kind of request that I get one. So he did that. He was like, "Yeah, man, I want you to get it. I know, like, I want you to at least get 14, because I don't know how much they'll bump you up to, but I want you to get at least 14." So he put in for that. And I ended up, the computer or whoever approves it ended up giving me like 21 cents.
Slaps in
So
the face, not even pennies.
yeah, so that was my I took that personally moment. So
Yeah,
I think eventually in April, I had all these things in the back of my mind. There had been workers organizing in Bessemer, Alabama, at Amazon. I think
yeah,
the folks at Amazon in Staten Island, I guess it was,
yeah.
were
The Staten Island and
yeah,
Amazon,
and then
Amazon Labor Union, rather, ALU.
right, and there had even been a Starbucks that organized on Maple Street,
Yep.
uptown in New Orleans.
Yeah. Shout
Um,
out to Billy.
Yeah, shout out to Billy. So I reached out to Billy. I reached out to a lot of different people. Even I jokingly texted a friend from high school like, "Hey, should I try to unionize this Lowe's?" And
Mhm.
one of the things that was interesting is I saw you only have to get 30% of your coworkers to sign authorization cards to trigger an election. And my thought process at that point was, I bet we can definitely do that, even if we don't win an election. That would maybe be something that could, force some concessions or at
Mhm.
least scare
Get
the
their
crap out of
attention for
management,
sure.
get their attention. Yeah.
And plus you
Um,
get a list of, and when you file, you get a list of everybody who works there, so you have that information going forward
right.
as well.
So I texted my friend from high school and he said, "Yeah, actually, I think that's a good idea," because he worked at a startup and he had been talking to the IWW. So he recommended I reach out to the IWW, and I ended up taking their 12-hour training course or whatever on Zoom with people from Seattle. And that was actually an eye opening experience, too, because I think that was one of the first times I realized how many LGBTQ folks, are such strong organizers, because that was the first time like I've ever been in a meeting and everybody said their pronouns beforehand, and I noticed a lot of people were like transgender and non-binary, and that was one thing that made me feel really good about it, was to see how many people who are sometimes the most vulnerable are fighting the hardest.
Because they
But
got to, right?
they got to, but that was really reassuring to see how many other people were involved in the same thing. So we ended up talking to the IWW, and they kind of started us working on mapping our workplace. And then the folks from the Louisiana Workers Councils that I had talked to were also giving me some advice. They were pretty relatively seasoned activists. They told me to reach out to the Teamsters and try to affiliate with them, which we did. And they're the local 270 here in New
Mhm.
Orleans is only a mile from our store, so we
Shout out to
felt
Local
like that would
270.
be
They have
pretty
that
good.
really awesome location too, right there on
Yeah,
right
exactly.
there on, Elysian Fields Avenue, right?
Right down the street. So I set up a meeting with them, and they act really impressed. They're always going to blow smoke up your ass because they're excited to see young people organize or
Mhm.
whatever. We ended up over the course of a few months trying to get more and more coworkers into their office, and they're always enthusiastic. They're always really helpful.
Mhm.
But logistically, it was just extremely challenging to get my coworkers in there due to people's varying
Mhm.
schedules and stuff. It's hard to make folks who just worked 8 hours uh, go to a meeting about something that you know like I've kind of known about unions for a long
Mhm.
time and known that they're a good thing, but not everybody necessarily knows about what that is. So it can be hard to get people in there, and it felt like
Yeah,
our workplace.
there's a lot of education that does not happen in this country about
Exactly.
unions. I
Yeah.
mean, I used to be a school teacher. I was a school teacher for 8 years, and,
Uh,
really, I mean, when you look at, the idea of, labor, it's something that's sort of such a key component in US history. It's basically sort of like shuffled into like a side note, if anything,
right.
or it's almost cast as a villain in a certain sense as well. To be like, oh, this is, look at these uppity workers that are standing in the way of these, brilliant genius titans of industry or whatever.
Right. Right. I think we learned about like the Haymarket stuff, and we learned about like
Yeah.
Pinkertons and stuff during that kind of era.
Yeah, you find out who Samuel Gompers is at the most base level, and you hear that
Right.
the
Right.
AFL existed.
Right. Exactly. But I remember taking one of my coworkers to the the Teamsters local, and she asked, "Is this your apartment?" And I'm like, "No, this
You should have
is
said yes. You should
no,
have said
this yeah." I was like,
yes.
"No, this is the union thing I was talking to you about." But when they got in there, they totally understood. Even when we talked about things like dues, they understood what the purpose of that was, why you're not getting cheated out of your money by paying dues. So. We ended up getting some coworkers out there to the Teamsters local. We sort of formed like an organizing committee of about 4 people, which I don't think was really enough for a 170 person workplace, but we were doing what we could.
Mhm.
Um, so while we're trying to get people over to that office, we're still kind of mapping our workplace. We got a spreadsheet going on Google Sheets to just see where everybody's at. And like you said, you do get a list of everybody once you trigger an election, but we wanted to go ahead and figure out how many people work there. So we used
Mhm.
a couple tools we had kind of sneakily at Lowe's. So there's these like safety trainings we have to do every single day we work there. And it shows a leaderboard of every employee in the store. So
There
we
you
just
go.
looked at the leaderboard and found everybody's everybody's name, and then there's also an associate lookup tool where you can see the family tree
Mhm.
of who works in what department. So
There you
that's how we
go.
figured out how many people work there. But yeah, going over the Teamsters was cool. They were really nice, really helpful. But logistically, it was just extremely challenging to get everybody over there. And
Mhm.
they don't really like text or anything, so I had to call them through like a receptionist or each time or a secretary. And they would usually miss the call because they're busy, and they would call me back, and I would be at work. And so it was a lot of stuff like that. And then I realized they would want us to get 80% of our coworkers to sign
Mhm.
cards, which I don't think we thought was doable, particularly if we have to get them to like meet on one single day and do it like they probably wanted us to. I think they would have wanted everybody to come to their office or meet at a park or something nearby.
Mhm.
Um, so we that kind of fizzled out. There was a meeting where there was supposed to be a lot of people there and no one showed up, and like the Teamsters had brought us food and everything, but they were like, "Don't worry about it. This stuff happens all the time. It's really difficult." But that was kind of a turning point for us, where I think we felt like maybe we need to change our approach, and we decided kind of to maybe take an independent approach and see how that would work.
Mhm.
Um, but eventually, I think around September, maybe this guy named Vince Quiles at Home Depot in Philadelphia ended up filing for a union. And so that was kind of our first proof that this could be done. And I got really lucky to be able to talk to him, and he's a really sweet guy. And I kind of asked him how did you do this, because he had an even bigger workplace than we did. I think he had at least like 140 people, maybe closer to 300.
Mhm.
But he was basically like, man, honestly, a lot of it like we did on the clock. um, Even like, yeah, like exactly, because that's so. I mean, I asked him point blank. So like, I know we're not legally protected. If I walked up to you with a union authorization card while we're on the clock,
Mhm.
we're not legally protected from doing that. Correct?
Otherwise, so essentially, what that could be interpreted as by the manager is you essentially shirking your duties.
Right.
Obviously, organizing a union is protected concerted activity. However, that has to happen sort of off the clock in break areas or common
Exactly.
areas or off site. So that's basically like the situation. What it is. I mean, you can't be. I mean, I I have no moral objection to
Yeah.
doing that, obviously, but I don't want
Right.
people to get in trouble. Really quickly, we're at the bottom of the hour. You listen to WHIVLP New Orleans 102.3. This is Good Morning Comrade. Felix Allen is joining us on the show. We're talking about his, ongoing saga of attempting to organize a union at the Lowe's it's on Elysian Fields Avenue in New Orleans.
Yeah. And so, like you're saying, that's not legally protected concerted activity. I don't mind saying now,
Right.
or it's like you can get fired for handing out union authorization cards on the clock, and you can't
It's
really
also
do
it's
anything
also
about it.
not always a good idea for management to know that you are the like leaders of a union effort
Exactly.
because I mean, while it is illegal for them to retaliate against you for or treat you any differently for organizing a union on the job, they will often, and it's legally, and it's if they were officially firing you for doing a union or investigating you or treating you any differently at all for
Right.
doing protected concerted activity, that would be illegal. However, they can get away with it in a lot of ways. They'll essentially examine what you're doing a lot more closely and start
Yeah.
firing people for just the most ticky tack stuff.
Yeah. So the advice I got from Vince was, and he wouldn't mind me saying this, is use your work time wisely.
Yes.
There's time where you're working with your coworkers, and you can use that time to talk about union stuff. And then I asked him point blank, and again, he won't mind me saying this: neither of us are going back to work at these places because we literally can't. I asked him, so I mean, I know we're supposed to get all these cards signed off the clock. Did you do that? Um, did you stick
Totally,
by that rule?
absolutely.
And he was like, yeah, wink, wink.
Yeah.
But so I thought about that and I was like, man, let's get this done. However, we need to get this done. And again, I don't mind telling you, we did a good amount of it on the clock. I mean, we were still working hard. We got all our work done faster than any human being should be asked to. But I mean, we literally just made our own union authorization cards and went to the Office Depot on St. Charles and made some. And I talked to before we printed them out, I talked to an NLRB informational officer and said, "Hey, this is what we're about to start an independent union drive. This is what our cards are going to say. Is that okay?" They said, "Yes, that's cool."
Nice.
And we printed them out on card stock. And like the week or so before we intended to start our union drive, we went and we kind of got a list of everybody and asked them pretty much point blank, "Hey, so if I came around with a union card next week, would you sign it?" Basically. So we got kind of an idea of who would sign it and who was more on the fence, and we felt like we had enough yeses to get going with it. Basically.
Nice. And so
Yeah.
essentially you started getting cards signed.
Yeah, so I think this was towards the end of September, and yeah, I'm not gonna lie, we did a lot of it on the clock. I mean, I had a job where I was lucky to be able to walk around a lot, and I worked in every different part of the store, so it was worth it. Everybody kind of knew already what we were doing. We had already had the discussions about, at least briefly with most people, what dues are, and we tried to kind of the word most people use is inoculate them about that. Told them, look, these are dues that pay for things like negotiating a contract and legal fees. And the thing is, we're also an independent union, so we're going to kind of decide what they are, what feels reasonable to everybody. Obviously, it works differently if you affiliate with the Teamsters or something, but this is not something that's getting taken away from you, because if you unionize, you're going to negotiate a contract where you get a raise that far outweighs the cost of dues, because it's very easy to outweigh the cost of dues with even a very small raise, and people understand that. And they also understood that any contract, we would ultimately negotiate is something everybody would get to vote on. And no one's going to vote on a contract that makes you lose money or gives you a worse deal. So we
Now,
kind of discussed.
let me ask
Yeah,
you, while this is happening,
yeah.
is management aware that this effort is taking place?
They did not know.
Mm-hmm.
So at some point, I do think they found out because they saw how much I was walking around. Um, I think we got 20 signatures on the first day, just between, break room, before work, after work. And I do think they noticed because someone did get called into the office that day. Um, and it seemed, and they got asked, "Hey, what was Felix talking to you about?"
Mm-hmm.
So they basically were suspicious that and we had to be a lot more conservative about our efforts.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but we were still pretty aggressive about it. I went to the parking lot at night because I live sort of near the store and talked to people as they were leaving work. I went to people's houses. And then I think one of the most interesting experiences during that point was uh, I actually just went to shoot basketball after work one of those days, and one of the guys lives near there, and he was walking home, and he saw me, and he came and started shooting basketball with me. And I hadn't talked to him yet about the union stuff, but
Mm-hmm.
I was like, "What the heck?" And I started talking to him about it. He's like, "Oh yeah, I've actually kind of heard about that stuff like happening at Amazon."
Mm-hmm.
So he signed a card like right then and there, and that was just crazy meeting someone like in the neighborhood on a basketball court like that.
I think it's a really interesting point that you bring up. Like when we see union efforts taking place across the country, that is a really good way to sort of kick off these conversations. It really is something that builds momentum. So having high profile, union efforts take place, especially
Yeah,
successful high profile union efforts take place, it can really have a momentum building component to it. And I also did want to talk about something as well. You mentioned
yeah,
earlier about the inoculation piece, about sort of talking about what management is going to do, or what management is going to, how they will respond, or when they do become aware of it. Talking about dues, talking about strikes, that part all is a part of an organizing conversation, and it's
Yeah.
really important to have all of that stuff in how you have these conversations all of the time. Like
Right.
it's a system that you have to kind of get used to. It really is an art.
Right. So we learned about when I took the IWW thing, and
Mhm,
I'm sure I saw it elsewhere, but they talk about the like AEIOU acronym of agitate, educate, inoculate, organize, unionize, or whatever.
mhm,
And we don't always follow that to a T, but the main things I got from, we know how to have conversations. Like I
mhm,
had, I knew these coworkers for a long time. It really helped that I'd been there a year and a half before I said the word union. But
mhm,
I think the main thing was just when we started, we went up to people and asked them like, "How are you doing? Like, how's work going? Do you have any complaints about work?" And that was the biggest thing is just listening to whatever complaints they had and
That's
building
the most
trust.
important thing, right? Listening is,
Yeah,
like, such a key component because, like, people aren't used to being heard.
right, right, exactly. People, or they're used to being ignored by
Yes,
management when they go
absolutely.
in on their own. Um, and that was cool. And we kept a list on a spreadsheet of everybody's complaints. So that was about four of us kind of doing that. And then in terms of literally getting the card signed, that was mainly me, just because I could afford to risk the most. So we
Mhm,
had all of us would have conversations about the union drive that was going on, but they would just send people to me. So if anybody got fired, that was a
mhm,
there's limits to that strategy, and
mhm,
that's not necessarily how I would want to do it. But I
mhm.
think in this instance, it was best to just put all the risk on me getting fired because
Yeah.
I could handle it. So that's how we went. The other people would have conversations with my coworkers, and then our coworkers, and then send them over to me a lot of the time, or they would tell me to go continue talking to them and get them to sign a card
Mhm,
eventually. And that worked out pretty well. Obviously, there are limits to that because it is helpful when there's a lot of public faces out there that kind of reassures coworkers. But we recognize that this is going to be a pretty limited campaign, and we wanted to, try to protect ourselves in whatever way we could,
mhm.
and for better or for worse. Um, yeah,
Totally, totally, and that's a difficult, line to walk. You're and having it hinge so much on a single person
yeah,
is kind of an issue. Not
definitely,
necessarily, well, depending on that person, like what happens to that person, and like if you get clipped
yeah,
early on, how do you reformulate everything when everything's leaning on that individual?
right. And I think we recognize, we were going to be lucky to even get to an election. So we
Mhm,
were just willing to try out whatever worked because this is, I mean, it's not necessarily like uncharted territory, but there are really no unionized stores like this. There are maybe some Costco's that are unionized. I think
mhm,
a Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, but no Lowe's, no Walmart, no Home
mhm.
Depot, as far as I'm aware. So
Yeah.
I think we were just willing to do whatever it took to get it done. So we ended up getting, I think, 68 out of it ended up being about 170 people to sign cards. So it was like
Mhm,
40% of our workplace. Obviously, again, if you're affiliating with an established union, they're going to want you to get closer to 80% or even
mhm.
as close to 100% as possible. But we were like, let's go ahead and make some noise about this. So
They
we ended
filed
up
the 40%.
we actually filed with less than 40% and ended
Okay.
up continuing to collect cards
Okay.
after that. But we just wanted to make sure that we got that in there as soon as possible and made sure we had that in before anyone got fired.
Mhm,
Um, and yeah, I think it was a reasonably good way to go about it. Maybe
mhm.
in the future I would definitely in the future I would, but maybe if I could go back and do it again, I would have pressured the other folks to be a little bit more public about it. But I didn't really have any idea how it was going to go, so I didn't want to,
Sure.
risk other people's jobs or get them into something they weren't ready for.
Mhm.
Um,
And
but
again, at that point, management becomes like they essentially, what did, I guess, filing look like? Was there any kind of action associated with it? Was there any kind of public movement with this filing?
Yeah, so we didn't do any like action. I know a lot of Starbucks workers will do like a march on the boss when they file, but we ended up, we decided we had enough and we're ready to at least make sure we filed since we had over 30%.
Hmm.
So I again called the NLRB, asked them, told them I would probably need help filing. I went down to the office on my S Street, and the one of the people at the NLRB helped me fill out all the information and kind of put parameters on what our bargaining unit was, and got the paperwork done with. So I came back, and then later that day, I handed the, I guess the just the petition to some of our managers. Our store manager was not there at that point, who would have been the really the good person to hand it to. But I
Yeah.
handed it to some supervisor and made sure they would let her know what we were doing. And then
Mhm.
after that is kind of when everything started happening. There was a lot of we got ended up getting a lot of media attention, which was cool.
Mhm.
But what was most interesting was when I came back to work that Monday, how the workplace had changed significantly. Um,
Really? After filing,
right,
what were the
right.
changes?
So there are, as you might not be surprised to know, there were a lot more managers in the store. I think there are
Oh,
about 3 times as many managers there. There was
so
there
you
are
got their
managers.
attention.
Yeah, there are about a lot of managers who used to work at our store were now managers at other stores. They were now at our store, walking around helping people. They were walking around asking people, say, like, how do you think this everything's going at the store? Like, what's going on? And we got the idea that they were probably trying to identify who would have signed a union card by seeing who was fed up or whatever. Um, people were had a I was pleasantly surprised to see people had a very cynical and humorous attitude about the managers doing that. They recognized that that was clearly some BS, and
And
that
I'm
what
sure
we
that there
did,
were conversations that are happening amongst workers, or at least amongst the organizers towards
yeah,
workers, to sort of like contextualize, like, why are there so many new managers around here, right?
exactly. So they recognized that what we did was something significant.
Hmm.
Um, that was a big thing. I felt like at that time there was usually a manager within like 50 yards of me. They tried to isolate me by making me work on the lighting aisle
They're doing
and
man-to-man coverage on you.
yeah, install. They had me installing like these lighting displays, but uh, that was when it was fun and a little bit less stressful. Because definitely during the union drive itself, where we had to keep it a secret, I was not getting any sleep. Like I would wake up at like 3 a.m. with my heart racing, just worried about if someone
What
was
could
going to get fired, if
happen?
we were going to get caught. But so it felt nice to be out in the open. I started handing out flyers in the parking lot,
Mhm.
which the managers would come out every single day and say, "Hey, we really don't want you out in the parking lot. We think it'll be distracting to workers." And I'm like, "Well, y'all don't own the parking lot. Do you have like a tape measure? You want to like have me a certain distance back?" And I just said the same thing every day and tried to
Yeah.
de-escalate. Really, what was interesting was when I tried to hand out flyers in the break room and they just stationed a manager there, and the store manager asked me to leave, and I was like, nah, I got a right to be here. This is not my work time. This is not a work area. And she was like, um, we want you to leave. And I was like, all right, you can, if you call the police on me and have them arrest me, then I'll leave. So she got on the phone with, I'm pretty sure, a lawyer, and the lawyer
Mhm.
told her to have everybody who was in the break room finish their break in the training room, the training room being technically a work area, which I wouldn't
Oh.
be allowed to hand out flyers in there. So that was clever on their part. That ended up getting, we ended up filing a ULP about all these things, and uh,
An
it
unfair
did
labor practice charge. We need
unfair labor
definitely
practice
we need to
charge, right?
define that for our audience.
Yeah, yeah. I remember the first time someone said ULP to me, I had no idea what that was, but
Mhm.
um, they did end up finding merit to that among
Yeah.
everything else.
And just really quickly, a ULP, an unfair labor practice charge, is essentially filing with the National Labor Relations Board that the company that you're attempting to organize is somehow breaking part of the National Labor Relations Act. They can't essentially close off break rooms and intimidate workers and do a lot of the things that you're describing here.
Right. So, I mean, I was at this point honestly having a lot of fun with it because it feels a little bit like you're untouchable because
Mhm.
I'd never been disciplined at this job. I
Mhm.
have reviews of my previous manager saying he's every time we get new employees, Felix is the guy I send them to train with, that kind of thing. Felix has never been late, blah blah blah. So it felt good to have that kind of sway. But the road bump we hit was that the NLRB called like a week later and said, Felix, there's a problem with the cards. There's no union named on them, and that was that was extremely stressful because we hadn't chosen a name yet when we made the cards because we wanted to go around and ask everybody, what do you think the name of the union should be, and try to
Mhm.
make it as inclusive as possible. That was obviously in hindsight incredibly naive, and I just should have slapped a name on those cards whether it sounded good or bad.
So you had to start
um,
over.
yeah, so we realized we'd have to start over. And even though, I mean, I literally read exactly what was going to be on the cards and asked them explicitly, is this going to be okay? I
Mhm.
asked the informational officer, and she said very explicitly it was going to be fine. So that was what was frustrating to me. But I should have, we should have known to just put a name on there. So
Yeah.
we knew we'd have to, we would either have the option to, and the NLRB took it up to like national leadership to
Mhm.
decide um, what it should be. I mean, I think it was a BS decision. I think they
Mhm.
clearly everybody knew what was going on at our store. There was no question of like whether we were affiliating with someone else or anything like that. Uh, but they said you should probably withdraw, or and you can recollect them, or you might have to. I guess it'll get rejected or something. So we ended up withdrawing, and I sort of entertained the idea of trying to recollect them, but I think in the back of my mind I knew the surveillance was going to be too tight to,
Mhm.
and we weren't organized to do it again,
Mhm.
organized enough to do it again. So we kind of briefly flirted with it, and we recollected a few signatures. But at that point, a lot of people were uh, they recognized that this was probably more than we had the capacity to do. Like um, seeing how easily they could bring in all those managers,
Mhm.
versus how difficult it would have been for us to like go on strike if
Start
we
from
had to.
square room. Yeah.
So I think that was a reality check for a lot of people. But a couple of good things that came out of it were some managers that people didn't like at least got moved to different stores. So I mean, it's not great, but they're someone else's problem now. But people recognize that we could get them to listen.
Mhm.
And then sometime in November, they put up this notice that said Lowe's workers nationwide are getting a $172 million raise,
Mhm. Oh
all
wow!
all without a union. And everybody at our store interpreted that to
Please
be,
don't start a union.
yeah, everybody at our store interpreted that to be because of us. The reasoning that Lowe's gave was because we take these online services,
Mhm.
or surveys every year called the
Mhm.
Best Survey, and
Mhm.
the notice said, "We heard you in your Best Survey that you want to get paid more, and we're giving you a raise."
Stop.
um,
How could we have possibly known that you wanted to get
yeah,
paid more if not
yeah.
for this perfect survey that we sent around to everybody?
Exactly. So, but what was I was happy to see that people clearly recognize why we got that raise. People would even come up to me and like just like bring me like Gatorades from the vending machine and say,
Nice.
or they just walk by me and say, "Thank you, man. Thank you, man."
Mhm.
So it was clear that people recognized or at least credited the organization effort for the raise that we got. So
Mhm.
even though it wasn't a huge raise for a lot of people, I think it averaged out to like 500 per worker nationwide. But probably our store got more of that proportionally. Like I
Mhm.
got bumped up to like 14 immediately,
Mhm.
and then eventually like I think 17 by the time I was done working there,
Mhm.
or I think I got bumped up to like 15 as a result of that raise. But a lot of people got decent raises. There are
Mhm.
people who were working there for like 20 years and still weren't making more than 15. So
Yeah.
it was reasonably impactful for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I guess we could sort of move forward to
Yeah.
there was a attempt at retaliation as well
Yeah.
by Lowe's to you, and you were actually successful in a national labor relations board charge against them. You want to sort of talk about what happened there in the last 10 minutes?
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, we went through a lot of supervisors. They're called MSMs, like my
Uh-huh.
direct supervisor above me, who would not have been included in our bargaining unit. We went through like, I feel like it was like four of them during the time between the time we organized and the time we got fired. But one of them, one of them ended up getting fired or moving to a different store. And before she left, she told us that the managers were always texting her, or the store manager was always texting her, asking, "What is Felix doing right now? What is Felix working on right
Surveilling
now?"
you like
So
close,
yeah,
which is again a ULP.
yeah, and she told us. I mean, I'm sure she wouldn't have been willing to testify to it, but she told us like, and she was like, "Yeah, he's doing his work. He's not doing anything wrong." She ended up getting. I'm still not sure if she got fired or if she got forced out or if she just quit. But we got a new manager. The next manager ended up writing me up on her very first week, I believe it was. Maybe her second week, but I think it was her first week. She put me on a final warning, which means like basically 2 out of 3 strikes.
So
Um,
wait. This is a first offense, final warning. They love doing that too.
Yeah. So, and it was because, like I said, during that P-51 project I got hired on for, I did a lot of climbing on things because managers wanted me to, and because I had to get the job done. I was doing that in order to drill something into one of the
Mhm.
upright poles, and she ended up calling me into the office with HR and saying I couldn't do that, and they were giving me a final warning for a safety violation for standing like 4 feet off the ground, which, I get people can die from that. But my previous like 5 managers were perfectly fine with me doing that and even told me to do that at points. So it was clearly an inconsistent enforcement thing.
Mhm.
So that was the second unfair labor practice charge
And
we filed.
and you would think, sorry to just jump in, but
No,
like
no.
you would think that there would be, instead of disciplinary action, there would be some kind of training response as opposed to
Yeah.
that. So if you didn't know, or if other managers were fine with it, that's one thing.
Yeah.
If they want you to do something differently, having it be a disciplinary measure as opposed to something that is essentially like, oh, let's train him on how to fix this, which,
Yeah.
I mean, quite frankly, it sucks, but like,
Yeah.
that's at least a appropriate and an understandable response, right?
Yeah. Exactly. And, I know they would have wanted me to get this certain type of forklift that it's got a platform that you stand on and raise. What they would have wanted me to do is get that forklift, block off all the aisles,
Mhm.
and use that to get into the position where I could drill into the pole,
Mhm.
which, works eventually, but it takes far longer. And you
Mhm.
can't have me do that and also expect me to get it done in the same amount of time. So there's that
Mhm.
thing too. But yeah, that was the second unfair labor practice charge we filed. The first one dealt with all the surveillance and intimidation that went on during the union drive. And then the third one came around June 2023. Is when we were in the back sorting some stuff in like, there's like just like a kind of parking lot area where they store a bunch of steel beams
Mhm.
um, outside behind the store. And my manager asked me to get on a forklift and pick something up.
Mhm.
She said, "Could you get on that forklift and pick that up for me?" Because I think I was the only one out there at the time who was certified. So I got on it and then I drove it a little ways and I realized there's this little tag on the back of the steering wheel that said "out of service for maintenance."
Mhm.
So the forklift was driving fine, but I told her like, "Look, this is out of service for maintenance. I'm not really allowed to be on it. I'm going to get off it now." So I, turn the key and turn it off. I thought it wouldn't be a big deal, but a week later, I got called into the office and they told me I was being investigated and they were going to take my forklift license away because I had gotten on that forklift. And I don't think,
Even though you ended up doing what you were supposed to do, you got off of
yeah,
stuff?
yeah. And I don't think it was the manager who told me to get on the forklift. I don't think it was her who ratted on me. I think it was this other new manager who they
Mhm.
brought in who I'm almost certain it was her who ratted on me for doing that. But yeah, and I think the issue with that was, if the forklift was really out of service, there should not have been a key in the machine that made it
Right.
so easy to drive. There's something called lockout tagout, which that forklift should have literally been locked out, and it should have been inoperable. Like
Mhm.
a lot of the times when they have forklifts that are out of service, they'll literally shrink wrap the cage so you cannot physically get inside. And that was not the case. So there was just a little tag that I couldn't even see when I was getting on the machine. So
Mhm.
I ended up getting called in the next week being told I was being investigated, and then ended up getting fired the next day.
Hmm.
And filed the
And even
third.
though it's again, like to point out, as soon as you saw, oh, this is tagged for out of
Right.
service, I'm not going to use it, and you didn't do anything further, which is like,
Exactly. Yeah.
wow.
So my mom, I talked to my mom about it. She thinks I got set up.
Hmm.
But I don't, I think it was more likely that they're just being opportunistic about
Hmm.
doing whatever they could to get rid of
Hmm.
me. But we ended up filing unfair labor practice charges for all three of those, and the
Hmm.
NLRB found merit to all three of them. It did take like 2 years. I mean, I
Yeah.
had to go in and give the affidavits, and it was literally about 2 years after I got fired that they all got resolved. But I ended up getting, I think, like 14,000 in front pay and back pay
Hell
before
yeah.
taxes.
Drinks
A
on
lot of that,
you.
yeah, a lot of that gets withheld. So I ended up with like 9,600, and ended up just spreading it around with some other folks who got fired.
Yeah.
But
Cool.
uh, I was glad at least something happened. I was very surprised that since this rolled over into the Trump presidency, even that it got
Mhm.
resolved.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, especially considering that there's some major changes that are going to be happening with the board
right.
now, which is not good for workers.
Not exactly, yeah. And a lot of people would. I remember during the election season, a lot of people debate whether I see a lot of people arguing about whether they should vote for Biden or Harris versus Trump, or whether they wanted to, I guess, abstain because of Palestine. Which
Hmm.
I understand either point of view, but I remember a lot of people saying we got to vote for Biden or Harris because of the NLRB. And my response to that is, I get you, but also it's extremely hard to organize already, even under Biden. So yeah, it's going to get worse under Trump, but it's quite difficult already,
Hmm.
even under what
Yeah.
quote unquote good in LRB.
Yeah.
So I always thought it was funny. Like I mean, it was already taking a year and a half to get resolved, even under Biden's NLRB, just due
Hmm.
to how understaffed it is and stuff, and under resourced the NLRB is,
Yeah.
which is not
Well,
necessarily his fault, but
well, I
uh,
mean, he definitely Biden was not an awesome president, if you ask me. But
yeah,
it's that whole thing that's a whole nother episode. You know what I mean?
exactly, yeah, right,
But
yeah,
anyway, we are kind of sort of wind it down. But sort of anything you want to say in the last sort of 2 minutes, and
yeah.
just
I mean,
where can people find you?
uh, uh, in nowhere relevant. But I think one good thing that came out of this, other than the material gains we made at our workplace, a lot of people learned from this. A lot of people who didn't know about unions before now know about unions, and there are a lot of young guys like me who are, they're going to work as truckers, or they're going to work union jobs, and they know what unions are about now. So I'm really proud that they kind of gained that
Mhm.
consciousness even after this NLRB thing. A lot of my coworkers reached out saying they got the letter in the mail from Lowe's,
Mhm.
that Lowe's is forced to send, saying all the things they did wrong to, say, hey, Felix is getting back pay. And they're like, I'm really glad you got back pay. I'm sorry what they did to you, but I'm glad, it feels like consciousness got raised a little bit, at least by this.
Good.
And I'm not necessarily optimistic about, organizing retail because it's so difficult, but I certainly hope that people will continue to try,
Yeah.
because if we don't, it's obviously, I think it's easier to organize, or it seems like unions are going to focus more on jobs that are like strategic choke points in industry a lot of the time, like, UPS, or flight attendants, or
Mhm.
anything logistics related. But a lot of people here in the U.S. work in service jobs, and I
Mhm.
guess that's one of the most significant changes from like
Yeah.
the last time unions were strong. Is a lot of us are working service industry jobs, and if we don't organize those jobs somehow, a lot of people are going to get left behind.
Yeah, exactly. Deindustrialization and sort of like exporting of those kind of manufacturing jobs has been, I mean, that's been a huge factor in the last our entire lives, essentially. Well,
Yeah,
thank you so much for joining us, Felix. Yeah, good luck, and send me your information. We can sort of put where we can find you to play music or whatever.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm working with this group called New Orleans for Community Oversight of Police, which we talked about
No
last
problem.
time.
Yeah.
So I'll send you that info. But yeah, Thanks so much for having me, comrades.
Totally, totally. Well, thanks so much for listening, everybody. Thank you for joining us, Felix. And yeah, this has been Good Morning Comrade, WHVLP New Orleans 102.3. We love you. Goodbye.